So me and Debbie have invited Barry McDonald. And so far we've been in the XR, VR strand. We've been hearing a lot about kind of the research backing up kind of like immersive media as kind of like a medium of the future and all the benefits that it can give you. And that's why we're so excited to have Barry McDonald here today, who is from Sterling, and that's where we met him, where he was organizing the something called the MetaFest. And the great thing about the MetaFest, which is kind of like quite similar to Waterkant in a couple of ways, was that it had a huge emphasis on how young people can actually get into new technology and learn the skills needed in order to have kind of like a great future. But that's going to be all from me, because Barry is going to tell you all about it. So I'm handing over to Barry, and afterwards we're going to have a couple of questions as well. Okay, let's go.
Thank you, Dennis. Let me just check. You can see the screen, that's okay?
Perfect.
Brilliant, cool. Okay, well, thank you, Dennis, and good morning, everybody. Before I start, I'll perhaps give a little bit of background to me and the organisation I work with, Codebase. So Codebase, we specialise in working with and supporting tech startups from our 3 hubs across Scotland, as well as working with startups right across the UK. For the past 2 years, I've been working on our Level Up strategy, which is a programme designed to equip young people with a range of digital and tech skills to give them a glimpse of the jobs of the future and the skills they'll need to do those jobs. As Dennis just mentioned, we launched MetaFest 2 years ago. It's a very hands-on exhibition, lots of interactive exhibitions and events, which the wonderful Dennis and Debbie took part in a couple of years ago. And MetaFest was really meant to inspire young people to think about the future, think about their place in the future, and to give them perhaps a taste of some of the jobs of the future. So this morning, I'm going to talk about the future of work, what the jobs landscape of the future is likely to look like, and how we can equip young people, but not exclusively young people, with the skills needed to future-proof themselves. I'm going to focus mainly on how tech and digital have changed the way we work, the jobs we do, and the shape of the future of work. So what are the jobs of the future? What hard skills will we need? What meta skills will we need? So when I started thinking about the future of work, I was drawn to the past, my own past, and all the strange jobs and careers that I've had. As you can see, it's been a very varied career. And should we ever meet in a bar at some point in the future, I promise to tell you more about eggs on legs. But as I began to think about these jobs, both in a current and a future context, I looked at them and I thought there's probably at least 2 or 3 that don't exist anymore or are on the verge of being obsolete, because technology is changing the world almost beyond recognition. It's a cliche, and we all know this, but technology is changing faster now than at any time in history. And in 30 years' time, we'll look back on this as the slow period. For example, the devices you're all watching me on right now are way more powerful than all the computers needed to put Neil Armstrong on the moon. And that was only 50 years ago. So is this so-called 4th industrial revolution something to be afraid of? Will automation and AI make all our jobs obsolete? To an extent, yes. It's something we can't run away and hide from, but we need to both embrace the revolution in the world of work and prepare for it. And more importantly, we need to prepare our children. So yes, tech, AI, the internet, it changed everything, but so did electricity. So did industrialization, so did globalization, so did the introduction of the car. Disruption is nothing new. And you have to remember that jobs didn't just disappear, they simply changed. Ever since the Industrial Revolution, fears of technology-induced job losses have been common. In the 1930s, the economist John Maynard Keynes warned of a new disease, technological unemployment. Some of the statistics are genuinely alarming, I think. Most of you will know this, and if you don't, you should, that 65% of young people starting their education this year will likely go on to work in jobs that haven't yet been invented. And up to 45% of all current jobs could disappear completely within 30 years. Essentially, anything repetitive or automated will go. As machine learning and artificial intelligence gathers pace, whole sectors will face the threat of extinction. Take manufacturing as one example. Have a look at this slide. You can see here the increase in industrial robots over the past few years. That's staggering growth. Automation and new technologies are creating new jobs and they demand new skills, but they're also removing the need for people to do some of these tasks. Almost 14% of jobs in OECD countries are likely to be automated, while another 32% are at a high risk of being partially automated. So approximately half of us will be affected in some way. And it's young people and those with low skills that are at the highest risk. And while this so-called platform economy is creating lots of new opportunities, there are concerns about the quality of some of the jobs that will be created, although I think that's probably a separate conversation. So ask yourself this, will your job be automated? There's a little link here, which you can see on the slide I will send on later. It's an interesting little example. You click on it and you input as much data and information about your current job, and it gauges the risk of your current job being replaced by automation. So I did this a couple of days ago, and I have to admit I was kind of surprised, but I was at medium risk. I think, like most of us, we like to think we're unique and irreplaceable, but it turns out that perhaps I'm not. I was presented with a report that said robots and artificial intelligence are doing about half of the work I do, and it's likely that I will work alongside more automated systems in the future. So if you get 5 minutes, it's worth having a look and trying. You might be surprised. So it's not simply low-skilled jobs that will be lost. Perhaps for the first time, white-collar jobs that don't require a tremendous amount of brain power or creativity will be replaced by software. Data entry, accountancy, paralegals can all be replaced. Software, automation, and AI will replace swathes of current jobs. You can see here from the slide, accountants, checkout operators, cashiers, all replaced by software. I visited a school recently and I spoke to a young guy who said when he leaves school, he'd like to be a bus driver. And I had to break the bad news to him that probably by the time he leaves school, there won't be any bus drivers or HGV drivers. It will all be driverless because things are changing at such a rapid rate. As you can see here, other jobs at risk include data entry. That was one of my previous jobs, so that doesn't exist anymore. Factory workers, retail, and telemarketing. So what are the jobs of the future? What are the emerging sectors? Well, emerging jobs include things like data analysts, machine learning, AI experts, big data specialists, software developers, digital content managers, healthcare. Healthcare is a growing sector due to the aging economy, aging population rather. Cybersecurity, conversational designers, all emerging jobs, but perhaps more importantly, many more that we just don't know about yet, because our children are facing a very different future from the ones we faced when we were young. And the work landscape will continue to change as their careers progress. At the moment, it's expected that most people will be made redundant twice in their lifetime. But going forward, that's likely to be around 12 times. What does that mean? It means that retraining and lifelong learning will be an integral part of people's lives. Do you know, it shocked me recently to discover that every primary school pupil in Scotland was born after the introduction of the iPhone in 2007. They've never lived in a world without iPhones, Wi-Fi, Netflix. But things change quickly. Back in 2007, MySpace had 165 million more users than Facebook. Twitter had only just been launched, and that was, perhaps only used by a handful of people posting pictures of their lunch. 13 years is not a long time. Whatever happened to MySpace Tom? Remember that guy? So speaking of 13 years, this is my daughter doing a perfect impersonation of a 13-year-old. It's an image we've seen countless times, teenagers glued to their phones. 3 years ago, when she was 10 years old, she asked my wife and I if she could have her first mobile phone. I have to admit, I wasn't particularly keen. I thought 10 was too young, and so we had a bit of a debate. And at one point in the debate, she asked me, well, Dad, how old were you when you got your first mobile phone? And I told her I was 27. And she said, what? Wow, your parents must have been really strict. And I said, no, I was just waiting on them being invented. Kids are growing up in a world where technology is changing everything at an accelerating pace. A few years ago, for example, you could teach a child that user interface is touching a glass screen on a smartphone. But by the time they leave school, user interface is voice commands. I wonder how many babies' first words are Alexa or Hey Siri. So we know things are changing faster than ever. For instance, while it took over 7 decades for phone penetration to go from 10% to 90% in the US, it only took 15 years for mobile phones and just 8 years for smartphones. Such technological leaps have had major impact on the way people work and live. Again, look at this slide. I apologize, it's a little bit fuzzy. But you can see here, it took almost 70 years for television to reach 96% penetration and only 8 for the smartphone to reach a similar level. So things are changing so quickly. What do we teach our kids? What are the skills they will need to survive this future? And how do we equip them with the skills to adapt to this fast changing world? One thing I believe we need to instill in young people, in fact, all people, and I touched on it earlier, is the notion of lifelong learning. As tech develops at a rapid pace, so must we. We need to keep up. We need to adapt to be constantly learning new skills so we can adapt to a changing landscape and build resilience. We need to create a generation of self-learners. If future generations are expected to face redundancy or change careers multiple times, skills like adaptability and resilience are absolutely vital. The information on the slide you can see here comes from a report from the World Economic Forum published just over a year ago, and it highlights what it believes are the key skills young people will need to develop if we are to equip them to face the challenges of the future. Resilience, critical thinking, collaboration, emotional intelligence. Teach them not to fear the F word, failure, because they're going to need to adapt. And yes, of course, they do need hard skills. If I had my way, I'd make computer science compulsory in schools. But realistically, not everyone is going to be a software developer, an AI specialist, or a robotics engineer. But everyone will need basic digital skills because they're going to need to adapt more than any generation before them. Okay, admission time here. This is my school report card from when I was 11 years old. It says, Barry has tended to be silly this term. I'm delighted to say I never stopped being silly. But when I found this the other day, I looked at it and I thought, well, you know what? Maybe being silly will have its advantages in the future because the creative sector is growing and has huge potential. Because no amount of artificial intelligence, I believe, will ever be as good as Beethoven, the Beatles, Shakespeare, or Michelangelo. So we need artists and creative thinkers and designers because they're the ones that will do the jobs that the robots can't. So we have a good idea of the skills young people will need, but I believe we also need to get better at making young learners aware of the skills they're developing. Just, excuse me, just recently, before the whole COVID-19 scenario, a young student came to one of the skills development sessions that we run at Codebase. And as she was leaving, I overheard her mother asking, what did she do that evening? And she said, I coded a microbit, little miniature computer. I coded a microbit to play rock, paper, scissors. And as they left, I called out to the student and said, wait a minute. What you need to understand is, okay, you did code a microbit to play rock, paper, scissors, but you learned an awful lot more than that. Remember at the beginning of the session, you couldn't work out the lines of code? Well, you persevered until you got it right. You worked it out. So you learned resilience and analytical thinking. And it was you who came up with the idea of creating, of coding rock, paper, scissors. So you showed creativity. And finally, remember, you helped the other young student sit across from you when she was struggling. So you also displayed collaboration and communication skills. So yes, while you learned to code, you also learned that you're a resilient analytical thinker with great communication skills. And she said, oh yeah, and those are the skills young people are going to need. So I think we need to get better at telling them because it's incredibly hard to measure these skills. There's no exam for resilience. And you know, another relevant anecdote, I think, a founder of a tech startup I know told me recently he'd made a huge mistake in his latest recruitment round. He told me he'd hired 4 data analysts several months ago, and then when I caught up with him, he said it was a disaster. I asked him why. He said the recruits were great at analysing data, but none of them had any initiative, creativity, resilience, or the ability to collaborate with others. Next time he recruits, he told me, he's going to hire resilient, creative collaborators and teach them data analysis. So those so-called softer skills or meta skills were far more important. But not everyone is cut out to be a software engineer or develop algorithms for artificial intelligence. We need to acknowledge the difference between digital learning and learning digital. Schools need to be able to meet the demands of a school population that is using technology all of the time. Schools need to be supported and challenged to ensure they keep up with developments. That can sometimes be difficult, I understand that, as technology moves at a faster rate than any school curriculum. But importantly, we mustn't shy away from the skills that seem difficult to teach, because it's those skills that set us apart from the robots. Schools should also focus on the skills as well as the qualifications. We have a fantastic opportunity to future-proof our young people, but we need to act fast. Okay, so finally, I think when discussing the future of work, it would be remiss of me not to mention the elephant of the room, coronavirus. I can sit here quietly predict how tech will change the way we work and the jobs we do, but something as unpredictable as COVID-19 or as predictable as climate change can have a dramatic effect on the world of work. So the skills we need to future-proof ourselves are no longer just about the skills we need to do our job, but the skills and strengths to thrive in a new way of working that includes remote working, socially distanced offices with one-way system. Things are going to change, possibly forever. According to a recent report, 19% of remote workers experience loneliness, and other research discovered that 60% of workers say their mental health affects their productivity. So clearly, mental health resources will need to be something employers really focus on. The world of work has already changed in the past few months. The challenges ahead are tough challenges, and we must be ready to face them. If 6 out of 10 people don't have basic computer skills, and it's the people who need the training who are the least likely to get it, the future is here, the future is now, and we need to start teaching young people the right skills to prepare themselves for a very different future. Thank you very much. That's all I have to say at the moment. And as you can see here, that's my Twitter handle. Feel free to connect and continue the conversation at some point. So that's me. I'll hand you back to Dennis.
Great. Thank you, Barry. That's such a great presentation. And what I kind of really love about the talks that we've been having lately here through the Waterkant Festival is it's kind of like a message of hope, you know, of we can do this. You know, it's a tough time, but there are ways of kind of future-proofing ourselves, future-proofing kind of like our children and the generations that are coming. So thank you so much for that presentation. It's very, very, very important. And I really liked that you said that how many times will we face redundancy in our lifetime?
It's likely to be around 12 times.
So 12 times losing your job.
Losing your job and perhaps losing your career, having to pivot significantly into a different career.
Yeah, and that's so drastically different to what like the 20th century has seen, and I think that's kind of like where a big divide comes from in policy making as well. Because if people coming from the 20th century are trying to apply like a lifelong job kind of agenda to our contemporary life, it just does not work.
It doesn't. I think there's an interesting book I recommend called The Squiggly Career. And it documents how the old-fashioned career ladder, which, you know, careers used to have a kind of linear trajectory, that's gone. Our careers are squiggly. Our careers are all over the place now. We no longer, or there are very few professions that now have jobs for life. So in realizing that, I think it is about equipping ourselves with the right skills and the right mindset to realize that we will have to change careers, but we can still take uh, those so-called meta skills with us. So if we're great facilitators, if we're communicators, if we're empathetic people, we can take those skills from career to career. But as I touched on in the presentation, I think we need to be more aware that we have those skills. For example, we all know. I mean, everyone actually in the world has shown a ridiculous amount of resilience in the past 3 months. When the world's been in lockdown, we've all been sent home, some to work from home, some not, but most of us have adapted. Yes, it's been difficult and there are ups and downs, but we've all displayed resilience. So, I think there is reason to be optimistic.
Yeah, I quite like that you said kind of that you mentioned empathy as well, because kind of culturally in Germany, kind of like being jobless has a stigma to it, with a lot of shame attached to it. And I think it's kind of the same in Scotland as well. It's just a very 20th century kind of way of thinking. And I just seen that Verena was asking in chat. I heard that storytellers are more valuable to society than coders, because coding is more simple to automate. Would you agree? And how could I learn to be a storyteller?
Wow, storytellers. Are they more important than coders? Some would argue that coders are storytellers, just in perhaps non-traditional ways. It goes back to what I said earlier about creatives having an advantage because they can do things that AI can't at the moment. So I guess it's using that creativity in ways that robots can't. How you be a storyteller, I have no idea. Start with a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yeah.
Oh, no, sorry, terrible advice. Sorry.
No, I think it's I think you're right. It's just start telling stories, start creating. Keep creating stuff. Don't be ashamed of. And that's the other great thing that you said about the F word being failure. Don't be afraid of failing,
No.
because that's where kind of like the most potential of learning is coming from.
Do you know? I always when I talk about failure, I talk to a lot of schools and young people, and I talk about the value of failure. And the metaphor I always use is computer games. So you ask a room full of kids who plays a computer game, and they all put their hand up. And then I ask, so the first time you played it, when you died, you lost a life, did you throw away your controller? Did you say, I'm not playing that again? No, you played again, and you got a little bit further in the game, but then you died again. And then you tried again and again and again. And you learned through that game, whatever it was, Fortnite, for example, you learned that perhaps don't go over there, and perhaps equip myself with X and Y to go over here and shoot them from up here or shoot them from down here. You learn every time you lose a life, you learn something better. So you're learning from failure. If you don't fail and you don't fail repeatedly, then you're not going to learn, or you need to learn from those failures. So I think when you put it in the context of computer games, they realize that a classroom is a room full of failures, but glorious, successful failures. So it's failing is normal part of life as long as you learn from it. I am a grade A failure. I have failed at many things in life, many things. I've had businesses that have gone bankrupt. I've had projects that just weren't funded and didn't happen. I've been made redundant several times. They're all failures, but I like to think I've tried to build up adaptability and resilience, and you learn from it. As long as you learn, that's the important thing.
I couldn't agree more. That's what me and Debbie always say as well. Whenever we kind of give a talk about our art or anything like that, is it is about failing and glorious failing. I think that celebrating failure is something that we need to learn as a society, and I think that kind of harkens back to the resilience you were talking about.
Absolutely. There's I don't know if they still do it, but in Codebase in Edinburgh, whenever a startup failed, they would have kind of company wakes where everyone would come together and have a little party, almost not quite celebrate, did. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about why we failed. Of course we failed. They're a startup, you know. The vast majority of businesses fail. So
Yeah, and it's also kind of like that's yeah. The chat is just saying, "Hooray to all of us losers!" Yes, Frank, you're absolutely right, or Frank. Yeah, a big applause to all of us losers right now. Let's do
absolutely.
to
Well done, everyone, on being a failure. Well
yeah.
done.
And I think the thing to remember as well is that we are doing this the first time. Everyone here is doing this the first. This is our first round of doing this.
Yeah.
So how can you not fail at every little aspect of it?
I've already failed once this morning, Dennis, by gate crashing the previous talk.
Yeah, good,
If you're
great.
watching the previous talk, I gate crashed it by accident and joined it. So there you go. I've already failed once today already.
Great. I think that's I think you should keep it going. I think that's
Yeah.
a kind of ongoing thing. So there's a couple of questions more from chat. So Jana is asking, just curious, did your daughter get the smartphone or not?
Yes, of course she did. I gave in, of course.
Well
yes.
done.
And now she's glued to it 24/7. So
Yeah.
I made a rod for my own back. But
Good.
yes, I have it. But I'm quite sneaky. I insisted that there's a tracker app, so I know where she is at all points.
Yeah,
which is
that's a good point.
maybe a bit controlling, but it also means she knows where I am. So
I think it's no, I think it's kind of important to have these kind of things, because there are horror stories about kind of like, because children just like to explore everything, right? They just go everywhere. So every single nook and cranny they can go to, they will go to. So it's about knowing that and being aware of that. There's another question by Verena asking, if you would be 16 again in these times, what would you do today to build your future?
well, that's a really good question. So I think to build my future, and this is the same advice I give to my 13-year-old as well, is trying to combine, if you are creative, trying to combine creativity, curiosity. I think remaining curious in the world, combining that with some hard digital technical skills. I think if you are a great artist or a great musician or a great storyteller, but if you can also code, if you can also work complex hardware, then I think you have a head start on other people. So if I was 16 again now, I like to think I was, and still am, a creative person, but I would be backing that up with some basic hard digital skills.
Mm-hmm.
And I would remind myself that I will definitely fail, and that's all right.
Yeah, that's yeah, that's always good. And coming kind of like elaborating on this a little bit, like for example, today the kind of open source nature of some of the software actually kind of allows you to kind of dabble in different kind of like industry standard kind of like applications. Like for example, Blender has been fantastic in kind of like having a great UI now, and kind of like even overtaking some of the 3D modeling tools that are being used within video games and the kind of CGI industry. So these are things that you can have a look at right now and play with. Same for game engines. Game engines have just recently, like as recently as 2015, I think, been made available publicly for free at the point of entry. But yeah, one point, sorry, one point is of course the software, the tools. I'm swelling up a little bit. Just tearing at just how great the future is going to be. I'm just starting to cry a little bit. Yeah, one part is of course the software, the tools, but the other side, of course, is teachers and actually engaging people with those tools. Is there some kind of because you've been kind of like actually teaching people, or kind of teaching young people, or engaging them? Is there some kind of advice you can give actually to teachers?
I think teachers have it really difficult because tech is changing so quickly. The school curriculum, what they teach in schools, will never ever, I believe, catch up with what's happening in the real world. Schools will always play catch up. in my experience, there are one or two outliers in the teaching community who are fantastic and keep up with tech and keep up with the skills and do their best. Uh, I guess it's about it's, the advice is not so much for teachers, but for the whole education system. I think it needs to be a lot more responsive. It needs to be adaptable. It needs to be able to change quickly. I would even say that a lot of university courses are churning out graduates who are not ready for the jobs they're supposed to do, because in the 3 or 4 years they've been at university, the jobs have changed, and the hardware, the software, the tech has changed significantly. So I think teachers need to get a lot more responsive. But I also accept that teachers do a very difficult job. So I think it has to come from the top down.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's just from mine and Debbie's experience, through Open Campus, we give kind of like VR sessions, and it's such a difficult task. So we've got about 10 sessions in total, and just to get to a point where I would say that I feel now happy about where kind of like the people within the course are getting to. The ability of me and Debbie kind of teaching them to get to a certain standard is very difficult to achieve, especially if there's no kind of huge funding available, but also just because it's such a complex theme sometimes to get into.
It's also, I think, for a lot of kids, it's in terms of education, it's access to devices as well. There was a news report here in the UK this morning that said and I'm probably paraphrasing, that something like 2 million children haven't done any schoolwork at all while the schools have been closed, because something like 1 in 3 don't have access to devices.
Wow.
So that's a whole other argument. But unless you have access to tech, how do how can you dabble in open source software, or dabble in games design, or play about and build your own website? You can't do it if you don't have access to devices. And even across Scotland, there's huge variations. The local high school, to me, where my daughter goes, everyone gets a Chromebook on day one. So she hasn't been in school since March, but she's, I hope, sitting in a room just now on her Chromebook doing schoolwork. But I also know there are lots of other schools in Scotland where that isn't the case. So they're at a disadvantage. So there needs to be equity in terms of access to devices.
Yeah, absolutely, and especially if you think that's a huge number of people who kind of will be lagging behind kind of those skills, and not through a fault of their own, but because of kind of like structural failure in a way to react to these kind of catastrophes.
Absolutely, and this is the COVID-19 pandemic and the schools being closed here. This is a prime opportunity to build your resilience and your adaptability and your creative thinking, because you have to at the moment.
Yeah, and I think it's also kind of like a word of kind of warning to policymakers and politicians to say, don't let us down now in these times, because we can try to be resilient up to a point, but if we don't get kind of like more structural help in kind of learning more skills and being more resilient and facing kind of these challenges, then there's nothing much you can do. So we do need help.
Absolutely, and I think as well, still touching on education and teachers, it's perhaps not necessarily the role of teachers and traditional bricks and mortar schools to develop those skills in kids, either the harder skills or the softer skills. It's perhaps programs like MetaFest, like Level Up that we do in Codebase. Perhaps there's something else as well. Maybe schools are not the right place to develop those skills, or there can be additional strategies.
Yeah, I think I quite like what the kind of the Open Campus is doing here in Kiel, and within this city is yeah, trying to kind of reach out to people who want to learn these kind of skills and kind of specialize a little bit in that. And that's kind of like a course that's beyond university and is open to basically everyone. Because as you said, like if we lose our jobs 12 times within our lifetimes, you will be at different ages
Yeah.
throughout that. And so it's not just about young people, but it's kind of like about kind of people new to the digital. And I really liked what you said about kind of like the difference between digital learning and learning digital. I think that's a very, very nice distinction. Can you maybe say something about that as, again, just to reiterate what you mean by that difference?
I think it's so digital learning, I would say, is learning in the 21st century within digital parameters. So kids using Chromebooks, kids at school using iPads, using is it kind of magic whiteboards, whatever they're called in school. So it's using digital tools to perhaps teach and learn in what might be called traditional methods. I would say that's digital learning, which also enhances their digital skills. So that digital learning will enhance learning digital. So learning digital would be teaching young kids how to code, uh, etc. So I think they both go hand in hand. If you grow up throughout your school career or your school life using laptops and using tech, then you're going to learn about them. You may use your laptop to do a history class, but you're going to learn digital skills in the process.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it does go hand in hand, doesn't it? It's kind of like it's kind of like learning by doing. So it's um, a, a lot of the times kind of people think that kind of learning something digital or kind of learning how to code is kind of like a very kind of heady theoretical thing. But it's actually not. It's very, very hands-on.
It is, and I think it's important to stress as well, as I said earlier, not everyone needs to be a developer.
Mhm.
Not every, you, not every, I can't. I work in the tech sector. I look at a line of code, and it's complete nonsense to me. I don't understand it. I don't need to understand it. But equally, there aren't many jobs that won't have a digital element to it. You
Mhm.
know, even dog walkers will have to do social media or do their accountancy on spreadsheets,
Yeah.
uh, their accounts on spreadsheets. So every job will have a digital element. But it is important to remember, I'm not saying that only people who can develop complex AI algorithms will ever have a job, because that's not the case. But you will need a digital skill. There will be a digital or tech element to your job.
Yeah, it's kind of like the interface between kind of like what we are as humans and what the digital culture that we're surrounded by, kind of like learning that interface. I think that's the kind of thing that does not necessarily need to include coding. It can be
Yeah,
3D modeling. It can also be just kind of like organizational skills as well surrounding that. Like, for example, the Waterkant festival, like a huge learning curve, I bet, for everybody involved, kind of setting up the live streaming and then kind of integrating Mozilla hubs into it as well. And all these kind of things. I bet they've been learning huge amounts of new things doing.
absolutely. I think there was a quote recently from Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. He said that we have witnessed 2 years worth of technological advancement in the last 2 months, because we've all had to learn new skills. And I mean, even I didn't know anyone who used Zoom 3 months ago.
Yeah.
I've not heard anyone mention Skype in months.
What
How's
was
Skype?
Skype? Yeah, no, yeah, it's fascinating how quickly it can change. Oh, Alex is saying 5 minutes left. So this means that if you have some important kind of links or kind of like messages that you definitely want to kind of shoot out, do that now before we kind of have to kind of cut you off.
I think the only thing I would say is perhaps we all, as parents, perhaps we all need to be aware of how much the world is changing and how work will change. I think it's important as well to, and I have mentioned this several times, this mental attitude of lifelong learning. And I think the best way to do that is to stay curious. Teach your children to stay curious, learn new things all the time, read articles about things that don't interest you, read a book that you don't think is going to be interesting, watch a TV show that's not really up your street. Stay curious, learn new things, because in a world where lifelong learning is important, that's going to be an important aspect. You will be learning new things all the time. So from an early age, if that's inbuilt in you to constantly learn new skills, then that'll be far easier going forward when you do have to change career several times.
Yeah. I think that, yeah, that's a very good message. I would add to that, and also don't be ashamed of failure, because I think that's that's the big takeaway here as well, because we will
Absolutely.
fail.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as you can see, kind of like in politics and kind of as a society as a whole, that is fraught with failure. Climate change, kind of like everything that's happening in the US as well, Brexit, so many failures. And these are by professionals, done by professionally failing, basically, all of us. And that's, yeah. So they are not ashamed. So don't be ashamed of your own failures. Just learn from it. That's the big message, I guess. Learn from your failures. That's very important. Barry, can I ask you a very kind of personal question? What's your children's dream job? So when they tell you what they want to be when they grow up, what is that currently? Do they want to be AI programmers? Oh, I think you're muted right now.
Oh, you're back
Am I
now.
muted? Are we muting? Oh, now I hear you again.
I'm back now. Yeah, sorry.
No,
another failure. You're talking about failure and things crash.
Perfect. Yeah, so the question I was asking was a very personal one. It's like, if you don't want to answer, it was about kind of like your children. What do they want to be when they grow up? Have they told you?
So my daughter wants to be some kind of designer.
Mm-hmm.
So not quite sure. That could be anything from graphic design to interior design, textiles, architecture, VR environmental designer.
Yes.
Who knows? So yeah. So as I said earlier, I'm just encouraging her to be as creative as possible, with at the same time learning some hard tech skills. So I think that's what she wants to be.
Okay. And lastly, what do you want to be when you grow up, Barry?
Man, I have no idea. I genuinely still don't know what I want to be. I'll be 50 next year, and I really don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I'll maybe go back to doing eggs on legs.
I'm so curious about that, and we will leave a mystery until we can finally see you in person again.
Yeah, I know. That's you'll need to stay curious about eggs on legs.
Oh my God, the mystery is gonna drive me crazy. But yeah, it's good. It's a good mystery. So yeah, okay. So kind of like final words from me is like I hope we get through these times. We will get through these times, all right, if we stay curious, as Barry is saying, not afraid of failure, learning from our failures, and yeah, just spreading kind of like a hopeful message of doing things, creating, and being active and reactive to our environments. Thank you so much for being here, Barry.
You're
So
very welcome. Thank you for having me.
And please, let's talk soon again.
Absolutely.
Talk to you more often. It's just a joy to hear you talk about the future. It's great.
Likewise. Thank you, Dennis.